Okay, just one more minute.
Hi, Meg.
Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Very good, thank you. I know Scott Townsley's on here. I have to give a shout out to him.
Hey, Meg.
Hi. All right, just give it another maybe minute because people are still joining. Hi, Greg. I think Greg just joined. There's Paul. Hi, Paul. Okie dokie. All right, why don't we get started, everybody? Thank you so much for coming to our Power Talk. I'm just going to go through a couple housekeeping items, and then Kane will kick it off. So we are recording, just so you know, and also if folks could just keep their phones and screens on mute until we start having Q&A. And then if you could just obviously keep it on mute for as much as you can if you're not talking. So we appreciate that. So go ahead, Kane.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kane Marshall. I'm the president of Good People. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy Monday, and welcome back from Christmas vacation to everybody. I assume it's same for everybody like it is for me. This is January 2023 Power Talks by Good People, where good people come to meet. We are very happy to welcome a good friend of mine, Mr. Marvell Adams, the founder and CEO of W Lawson. I would like to open the forum to Marvell. Thank you very much, Marvell, for joining us today. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Kane. I appreciate it. Is anybody else like me? Kane, I've been dying to ask you, like, did they call you Sugar Cane as a nickname in school? Because
That's a good question.
it seems like it's right there.
So, Marvell, when I was a child, sugar cane and candy cane were the two reasons that I disliked my name so much in elementary school. And it sort of evolved and it became something cooler, much cooler later on in life. So great question. And I dealt with that my whole elementary school life.
Gotcha. From one person to another with a unique name, I can understand. So, well, thanks so much for having me, Kane, and the entire Good People group. I've been learning more and more about this group and the kind of shared cause that brings everyone together. And having met Angus a while ago and Kane more recently, it's just really a pleasure to be with you. So I'm going to try to do less talking and more kind of engaging. And so feel free to chime in whenever you want to. What I'm going to chat about probably is only going to take 15 or 20 minutes of our time. So you're welcome to pepper in questions, or we can kind of queue them up towards the end. But either way, just please be comfortable and feel free to include yourself. So I did do a couple of slides just to make it easier for me to stay on task. So let me pull that up. All righty. So, excuse me, getting over a little bit of a cold. So pardon me, clearing my throat a lot. So W Lawson is my company. I started last year, and the mission being create community and do good. We're three parts. One part is, there we go, community and housing development. And the big piece I'll say about that is what I'm going to talk about throughout our discussion today is really how we create equity in aging. And part of that has to do with how do we make housing and community development more inclusive and bring in more individuals that may have been historically marginalized or excluded, knowing that every single age band, identity of older adults, there's not enough housing. A provider organization, meaning that we don't just build and then develop, but also operate And then the biggest passion of this, which is the way we expand our mission beyond just our own work, is we do consultation around inclusion strategy. So specifically around what does an organization do to not only have a strategy that drives their master planning, drives the next few years, but also recognizes a lot of what I'm going to talk about today, which is the demographics changing pretty dramatically over the next couple of decades. So inclusion strategy being a big part of our communication. So this slide here is a lot, and I'm going to let you absorb it a little bit, but it's mostly what you already know, which is today, 2023. So, if God bless you, but if one of you had a kid today, when they go off to college, that's when these numbers will be coming into reality. But 56 million older adults today, 81 million projected by 2040. So a 47% increase. So what we know. And really starting to see those peak years come into fruition around the baby boomers and them entering a realm of wanting and seeking out services from providers. But then when you start to break those numbers down and look at, for instance, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, you have a 107% increase in that same time span of individuals that are Black, Indigenous, or people of color that are of the age 65 or above. Now we know that that market is really younger than that. We really hope and pray that it'll remain to get younger than that. But this is just talking about the 65 plus realm, and so you can imagine the numbers being more significant if you go down into 60 and 55. And then LGBTQ plus, which is a very difficult measure to quantify because it really is about people identifying, and there's not really a census-driven database. But the estimates show that around 6 million LGBTQ individuals that have identified. So another doubling of the individuals that are in that group. So overall, this is an interesting picture because it keeps telling us what we already know and what we expect, which is that the older adult population is going to continue to increase dramatically. Now, if you read ahead in our assignment and look down at the bottom there, you'll see there is a couple of tidbits that are interesting, I think, with this. Is that, our historical market and I don't mean you, I don't mean me, I mean like our market as providers and as business partners has been affluent white. And I take that back. For some portions of the businesses that we do, I recognize that there is not necessarily affluence amongst individuals that are in nursing homes and qualify for Medicaid. Be that as it may, the actual percentages around Hispanic non-white, white non-Hispanic, really still hold up. So that you're seeing about a 24% increase in that group over the next 20 years. But when we get to that 2040 mark, this is when it gets really interesting in showing just how quickly and dramatically the racial diversity, as well as really in many, if almost any other categories around identity, because many of them also have to do with folks identifying themselves, is that in 2040, you start to see an actual decline in the number of 65 plus whites. And so this isn't just about a case statement of how do we be more inclusive because it's the right thing to do. That is important. How do we be more inclusive because the business case for it says that we're a better organization when we have diversity of thought and of perspective and background. That is also true. But I think the thing that I drive home today in our conversation is that the bread and butter that is the market that we target quite readily within our industry, the older white adult, will start to decline about 1 million per year in the 65 plus category starting around 2040. During that same time period, another statistic starts to do a one-for-one trade-off, if you will. So for every less white older adult there is starting in 2040, there is one more individual that identifies as 2 or more races. So that's just one sliver of Black, Indigenous, and people of color, but to give you an indication of just how significant that is, you're not just talking about minorities as a whole increasing and then showing that juxtaposed with a decrease in older adult white non-Hispanics. You're talking about even just certain segments of the population, and keeping in mind that the way we count people still means that if you have part of your identity that is of a person of color, you are considered a person of color. So I offer this to you because it really gives you an overview. What is the context that we're talking about? So this next part I want to jump into is really, so what do you do? Because I would offer up to you something, maybe controversial, is that I think most providers would scrape by just fine without being more inclusive. Meaning that the 81 million older adults that we will see peak in 2040, there will be a lot of old folks to care for. There'll be a lot of old rich folks, there'll be a lot of poorer folks, there'll be middle class, there'll be enough, quite frankly. And what is also abundantly clear is that there's not enough housing, period. Meaning that there's not enough housing for individuals in the middle market. There's not enough housing for individuals that are of a higher affluence that are looking for a sense of belonging and connection, but maybe don't see themselves living at our traditional communities. And the other piece that we don't talk about much is that we build and create housing, but the fastest group growing in the homeless population are older adults. And in fact, of that subsection of older adults that are homeless, the fastest growing of that are individuals that are 65 plus, homeless for the first time in their lives, meaning that they've made it 65 years. They made it through Vietnam. They've made it through understanding what their parents dealt with scarcity of funds in World War I and World War II. They lived through a lot, but now in their 70s, finding themselves for the first time being homeless. And so those numbers start to rack up pretty fast. But I say that because in the inclusion strategy portion that I want to talk about, this really has to do with as well socioeconomic and income diversity and inclusion, because that is really one of the binding ties that delineates between those that engage in our system and those that do not. At least it gives you an indication of where their options might be. So the first part of it is engagement. I feel really strongly that any organization that's going to start an inclusion journey or trying to develop a inclusion strategy of some point in order to enrich their overall future plans, it's not about training. I think out of the gate, I don't think it's about assessing and finding out. I think it's about engagement, because many organizations, if you aren't currently engaging with your staff, if you aren't currently engaging with those that held up the night shift before, during, and after, or whatever this is now, post-COVID world, for those individuals that have had their 10-year pins or 20-year pins, for those residents that have been there, having an open and reciprocal dialogue, period, is the first step. Because as you can imagine, I have not met many of you in person, and we have not had in-depth conversations about much of anything, probably most of us on this Zoom right now. If I were to say, hey, let's have a really in-depth and serious conversation about race relations in the United States, and we've never had small talk, it's kind of a tough sell. And in fact, it's what the uncomfortableness that starts to rise up in someone's belly when you start to talk about conversations, not just around race, not just around gender, not just around sexuality, but kind of any topic that really is not front street for us in the sense of our society. So that engagement piece and understanding that there is a mechanism for all voices to be heard, and being able to engage in a way where it's not where you're just coming around because it's activated insights time of the year, or you're just coming around because the Hollering survey is coming up, or We Care Connect, whatever it may be, there has to be some sort of engagement that exists, or the interest in having an inclusion strategy developed with the explicit action of beginning to engage. Assessment. So once engagement has begun, because engagement's never going to end, the moment that stops, the other parts of this really start to fall apart. But assessment is what is the objective data that we can collect that tells us what our past practices are? Some of this is around historical acknowledgement. So for instance, and I'm not thinking of a particular community, but I'm giving you kind of a straw person, I guess, to consider. Organization's been around for a century. They were started by Episcopalians, well known. They have multi-site provider, but that part of their land that they continue to own was given to them by former slave owners. Now, you may think to yourself, that seems like an absurd kind of example, Marvell. And it's like, well, nowadays it's not, because there is more and more tracking back to understanding where wealth comes from today. And so I don't say that as a throwing on the sword and saying we're bad people because we may have land that existed that will belong to someone else. The secret is that all of it does, like all the land belongs to somebody else. Didn't say, so it's not that part of this that I'm really trying to get to. What I'm trying to ascertain is that how do we assess where we've been so that we can acknowledge if there's wounds there to heal? How do we assess if the staff that serve our residents, when you're talking about individuals that may have be in their 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s that lived through some of the worst periods of racial injustice in our country post-slavery, juxtapose that with a mostly person of color direct care staff. Understanding what may be behind those past practices and how they may be informative of future action. Present sentiments. In what way is the organization assessing itself to understand, okay, how do we see ourselves when it comes to inclusion? And I really press on the word inclusion because it's an additive word. Diversity is an outcome. Inclusion is what it takes, the energy, the action, the ability, the strategy in order to create the diverse environments and to seek equity for stakeholders. But present sentiments, what is actually going on currently in the organization? Are there sentiments around how staff are treated? Is there equity in the way that evaluations are done? Whatever it may be, is there some sort of way to actually get a temperature check? And many folks do this already, depending on the questions asked, but there's satisfaction surveys, there's engagement surveys. Do they ask questions that may get to more of an inclusion realm? Maybe, maybe not, but understanding what the present sentiments are. And then future trends and opportunities, which we do really well. We have been jumping up and down for the last decade or two around the baby boomers are coming, they're coming, and now they're here and they're starting to engage more with us, not necessarily all moving into our communities, but engaging more with us. So we understand future trends, but with the data I just showed you, understanding that we are becoming a majority minority country, meaning that the majority race, at least being historically white, will still be the largest racial group in the country. But I think it may have already tipped, but we'll know for sure in this next census. But is that the minorities and the Black, Indigenous, people of color will then as a group outnumber and be in the majority. And so that understanding of that future trend and who our future customer and client might be is a big part of what that assessment entails. And I'm not talking about some proprietary thing that I invented. I mean like an assessment of what's going on in the organization. And there's a whole bunch of different notions of what that could look like in products. Shared learning, this outside of engagement, I would say shared learning is the thing that cannot be skipped in any inclusion journey and any strategy development that is infused with inclusion. How do you level set for the fact that, at least on this call, I would be absolutely certain that we all have different perspectives, we have different lenses through which we see inclusion, where we see our own identity, and how do we have a shared learning experience that brings us along, not to have someone catch up with where Kane might be or have Angus be in the forefront of where Meg might be, but instead to say, okay, we've assessed our organization, we find out that our perception of ourselves is a little bit of gap between how we see ourselves as being inclusive and how we our actions about inclusion. So being able to understand, okay, what is it that we can learn about ourselves and what can we learn in order to move the ball down the field? And that comes about choices and priorities. It becomes around what is important in our area. Are there historically marginalized and excluded individuals in our PMA that we want to recognize? I think of Fraser communities out in Colorado. One of the things that they have as an element of some of their cultural competency is recognizing the contribution of indigenous peoples to that part of the country, tribes of which and reservations of which that are still in close proximity to the land that Fraser is on. So what is that shared learning and having an opportunity to gain competency, as well as for stakeholder engagement? Because once you've got them actually engaged, and maybe that's already been the case for the community, this is the piece that really drives an ability of an organization to learn and share back with all stakeholders. This is the journey we're taking together, and each individual has an expectation of being a part of that journey. The three elements of this that I first mentioned, engagement, assessment, and shared learning, all of those are really wrapped into, now that we've got these rolling, that's when the plan development actually can begin. Doesn't mean that you wait until the end of this, that you've done a bunch of shared learning for years, but instead it means if you've begun to engage, if you've thought through how to assess and maybe had some data already, if you've thought through and started to have a shared learning experience, you're starting to put the pieces of the plan together, which can then allow the organization to move forward with creating an inclusion strategy. But this is not just a plan that is a bullet point as a part of your current strategic plan. I would argue that it is much larger than that, because you really are talking about the clients that you want to serve, the staff members that will serve them, the decision makers, meaning board and senior leadership of the organizations, and all three of those groups being inextricably tied to one another. That you can't, it doesn't work if we don't have residents, it doesn't work if we don't have staff, it doesn't work if we don't have leadership and governance. And so all three of those pieces being a part of the plan development, not just talking about inclusion within just one realm of it. But this has to be organized and actionable objectives, not just, sorry, I'm talking in the negative so much. It needs to be organized and actionable objectives with a strategy framework that really allows the organization to not just grow from an occupancy standpoint or grow from a site perspective, but really from a furtherance of its mission. What is it that we're going to do? And many organizations on this call, and many that we know, come from a faith-based tradition. Many organizations have sought accreditations through SAGE, through cultural competency standards met through CARF accreditation. There are lots of things that with inclusion organizations are already furthering their mission along. But the plan development piece of this really talks about, now that we have these assets moving forward, how do we really pull this into an inclusion strategy? And so what I'll say lastly is these four elements, engagement, assessment, shared learning, and plan development, they are still kind of wrapped up in one big capsule, and that's 360-degree accountability. Because none of this is really possible. Nothing we really usually do in work is possible if there's not some level of accountability. And in this instance, I say it's 360 degrees because of those three stakeholders I just mentioned: the staff and leadership of the organization, the governance structure, meaning the board, and then the residents. So how do you actually engage in a way that allows there to be accountability from the staff within the organization and the inclusion perceptions that they may have and the lenses they look through? What does inclusion look like from the perspective of senior leadership, and how do you juxtapose that with governance? I could give a whole nother conversation around governance, but one thing I usually say to folks is more and more there is a topic around DEI in the boardroom. The efforts to make that change are going to be slow, probably. And what I offer to folks usually is saying, you know, if the folks that you are trying to attract to your community, or the leadership that you want that is more diverse than what you have, if a board looks around the room and does not see in the room anyone that is representative of or connected to or can be a conduit to the diversity you seek, you're probably going to get what you've always gotten, which, if you got a board with no term limits, or they've been on since, I've been here for 20 years, that starts to set a status quo that is more impactful than probably any strategy to try to combat it would ever be. So I'm going to stop there and open it up for a conversation. I'm happy to take if you're curious, that is a scan if you want to just go to the website, but most of you, I think I see you on LinkedIn, so I have no doubt you'll find me if you want to. But, I talk about this because not only because I'm just passionate about it, because I truly do believe that just looking at the data, that we as providers are in a precarious position and will continue to be in a less advantageous position if we're not able to say to the people to the humans serving humans, the humans we employ to serve the humans that we serve, if those humans are not seen as that they belong in our organization, if those humans do not feel included, we are seeing that there's an exodus because of a whole bunch of factors, COVID not being the least of them by no stretch of the imagination. But we're also recognizing that people are starting to select out because they do not see themselves as being a part of that community for any host of reasons, and maybe they found belonging elsewhere. I consider it this next chapter in my life's work. So thus the founding of the company. So Kane, I will pause here and ask if there are folks that either would like to chime in with their own thoughts or if they have questions.
So, thank you, Marvell. I'm gonna ask people if you have any questions, please put it in the chat, or you can raise your hand and then unmute. And while we're waiting, Marvell, I'd just like to ask a question. It sounds like you are currently working with some clients, and I think you mentioned Fraser, and do you have any examples of how some of what the components of your work, or if you have any examples of stories about how some of them have played out, and that can give us some insight?
Sure. Yeah. So just to be clear, Fraser is not a client, at least at W Lawson, but a friend in the community for sure. So examples I guess I would put it this way, because it would give a better sense of it may be more pervasive or resonate with more folks. And so some of you may work off of a matrix for the recruitment of your board members. And so I bring that up as an example because I've been a CARF surveyor for a while, but whether it's in employed places that I've been or CARF surveys, I have found that boards that work off, and I'll talk more about with the matrix in a minute, that work off of a matrix are much more intentional about their ability to stay diverse. And so, I'm sorry if this is for folks that already know this, but being able to be intentional about what is it that describes the identities of our board members: race, ethnicity, nationality, professional, age, every category that you could think about, because if you do not understand and recognize transparently the identities within your board, then how can you be more diverse? Because it's not just about differences amongst the board members, which you can get that pretty quickly. It's about how do you become representative of the community at large around you in which you sit? How do you become representative of the people that you serve and those that you choose and want to serve? But being able to actually, and when I talk about a matrix, I mean something that's a document for the board governance committee oversees it, and it allows you to look for holes in your diversity plan, inclusion strategy. One organization that comes to mind is they really were interested in working more with Indigenous peoples. Being able to find that representation is not the easiest of things, I think, for most people in most parts of the country. When you talk about a board that is interested in including more individuals from the LGBTQ community, you name the type of diversity, what I've seen as the game changer, because many of the reasons that folks say that it's not possible to diversify their board, even if you get a really nice Excel, tricked out matrix, is well, we're in, Vermont, or we're in Montana. And it's like, well, okay, how often does your board come together now? They're on Zoom, right? So in my mind, there actually is a pathway to diversifying boards that is far more in line of sight than we've ever seen it. But the line between that opportunity and now is really the courage to be able to put yourself out there transparently and say, look, we are a board of mostly men, we're a board of mostly Episcopalian, we're a board of mostly individuals from the low country of South Carolina, whatever it may be, but identify that for the organization and understand what you are, because that's the only way to understand what the differences may be that aren't at the table. I see a hand up at Carolyn.
Hi, Marvell.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Hi, everybody. First of all, thank you for having this discussion. It's overdue. So my question is, I think first I have a comment. I think the frustration with a lot of organizations is finding the time to make this happen, because a lot of us are in communities where we have full-time jobs and we're doing a lot of the diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging piece on the side. And it's very tempting to just check a box. So how do we make this sustainable when we're not really putting the effort, we can't really put the effort in because we have so many other distractions. And I think when that happens, it adds a level of frustration, and people tend to want to give up before the work actually gets started. So what would your advice be for organizations that really are trying to do it, but not really committing to investing in the process?
Yeah. So here's what I would say is that there's a whole bunch of different ways I think you go about it. The thing that comes to mind right now is being able to quantify what it's going to take to do what you want to do. So the example I would give you that if you're talking about, you want to be able to grow the diversity of the resident population within the organization, and you pick out a goal out of the sky because you want to have something to reach towards. So we want to go from 0.25% historically marginalized groups of individuals living here to 5%. Okay, fine. You want to go to 5%. So 5% of your resident population, if it's 100 residents there, it's 5 residents, right? If you go look at your marketing data, how much are you spending per lead per close? Multiply by 5, and that's your start. So the calculator for figuring out how much we could, should, and ought to be spending and putting resources toward this work, it's there, it exists. But if, and we used to call it, how much did it take to make that phone ring? But, if your close rate is 10%, 5%, whatever it may be, and when you add up your marketing budget, it costs, I don't know, $18,000. Let's be, really conservative. $20,000 is a round number to get someone to move in. And you want 5 individuals that you've never had in the organization, or that you are seeking that increases the lower numbers that you've historically had. If you can't say, let's devote the actual dollars it takes to close a new resident and multiply that what we want to see in the impact, if you can't come up with that 5 times 20, which is 100 grand, then what I would say is that that's no different than saying, well, let's cut 100 grand out of the marketing budget because we don't have time. Mm-hmm. So that's my perspective on it, I guess, is that there has to be some way to quantify with the organization how important this is, because if I'm talking about inclusion strategy, which I am, if we're talking about inclusion strategy, we really are talking about something that is as big as the organization. And what does it look like to have resources behind that?
Can I follow that up with, would you use that same type of formula when you're talking about quantifying what you need when it comes to expanding leaders of color in leadership. And I know just coming from the Leading Age conference, Leading Age did a very good job in being very specific in showing the statistics across the board in aging services and how the leaders of color, although we're represented in the workforce, we're not represented in leadership. And if those stats you're talking about, 2024 going, if those stats you're talking about in 2044, and we're going to be looking like we are looking population-wise, that needs to change now, because people do want to see people that look like them. If you're trying to recruit people of color into your leadership positions. So, and I know that's been a challenge for a lot of organizations to quantify that. And I'm trying to figure out easier ways for us to do that, because it shouldn't be as hard as it is, because there are really qualified people out there.
Yeah, it is multi-layered, Carolyn, for sure, around does that mean the pipeline and we try to get interns in here? Does that mean trying to grow our own and being more intentful about historically marginalized individuals that are on our staff? What does that look like? And I always go back to, you got to start from where you are. And if you're putting zero resources towards it, then you need to put something and decide where you want to start. And this is the last little bit I'll give to you. The only way you can prove that you started is to have something to measure when you get down the road. So if you started in 2019 and your measurement doesn't roll off your tongue as to what you've been doing, then you really haven't, in my opinion, you really haven't started. And so what are the resources that need to go towards it? So sorry, Lori, and then Monica, I believe, or I'll ask you how to pronounce your name in a moment if I said it wrong. I apologize. Lori.
Thank you very much. Lori Porter with NACA, the National CNA Association. Hi, Kane. Good to see you, and great to be with good people. Marvell, I think in your past life, you were an administrator like me. And I have not been an administrator since the 90s, but I know we did zero back in those days to address any of these situations. But I've noticed in my 27 years working directly with CNAs in this association that this diversity, equity, and inclusion is very much needed on the front line. Just in personal experience, in our board of directors, I have only had 2 non-white CNAs serve on the board of directors. And in our small group, it's been problematic to some degree. How would a care center with a very diverse care force, I don't like to say workforce, but care force, how would they best approach this? Is it better to start at the top or to address the issues that are currently pervasive in our largest employee group?
Really good question. So let me make sure I understand it, Lori. So when trying to attract more individuals, historically marginalized folks, people of color, queer, to being CNAs, how does an organization do that? Do they start at the top, or do they try to develop, at the direct care staff?
Yes, I'm most interested in, how they would best approach the direct care staff in terms of the 4 principles you used of the inclusion.
Gotcha.
Or what did you do to address those?
Yeah. You see me, I'm like moving around in my seat.
Sorry, man.
No. It's not even from discomfort. The details matter, So I will give what I think I'm hearing and try to put it into some context for our conversation. So I think that career ladders, I think that very transparent notions of what the organization is trying to accomplish, because what you don't want to see happen is that the few people in the organization that are of color or gay, out and gay, or whatever identity partner you want to talk about, I guarantee you, they've had people come up to them and try to get their advice and their help and their buy-in. I think you still got to start from an engagement standpoint, and how do you understand what that person's needs are? Because if we're talking about groups of individuals that from a societal standpoint have been historically excluded or marginalized, I tend to think that means that what it took for them to get to work that day may be different than someone that is not marginalized. So coming into work and then having on top of that the responsibility of educating others about how you feel about what's going on in the organization it's a burden. And so instead, what I'd say to folks is that you may have champions in your organization. Those champions have a job that you pay them to do. So what is it that you can offer to them that allows them to be a resource to the organization? So some folks look at that as affinity or employee resource groups, but what is it that you can bring together that allows the organization to say to that group or groups of individuals, hey, we recognize there's a gap in perhaps what resources you need to have and what we offer or what is available to you, and how can we help close that gap? But I'll go as far as that, Lori, because you get more specific than that. It really does come down to the details of the organization, because every place is absolutely different. So
That's
thanks.
for sure.
And Monique?
Monica.
Monica, gotcha. Thank you so much,
Yes,
Monica.
I'm Monica Acosta, and I work at Landis Homes Retirement Community in Lititz, Pennsylvania. And we are CARF. We do have CARF accreditation for ourselves, I believe, one of two in our area. But and I really want to, our organization has just recently begun crawl into the DEI journey. It picks up steam and then it slows down and then it picks up steam and then. And I think you've probably answered some of my questions about how to really put some real meat on the bones there about having quantifiable things, and being able to have something to measure. And I know at one of our last DEI meetings, I really challenged them to, okay, what are we doing here? Where are we going? What do we want to do? And I don't know if you had any strategy or ideas with CARF, because this year was the first year I was ever asked anything about DEI for CARF, kind of providing information as we prepare for our next round with surveyors. So, I want to really hold our organization accountable. And so what advice would you give about, okay, if we want to stay with CARF, we really got to prove this. If we want to move and be prepared to serve people in our community, what can I say to my organization, to the leaders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, and just to, be clear, I get paid by CARF when I do a survey, but that's about it. But I'm not an ambassador for them. But I will tell you that having been with them for the time I have seen it evolve. So you're right that it has evolved. It is evolving from a cultural competency plan based standard, which means that essentially, if you have a plan, then you meet the standard. And it's evolving to one of and it's really what we're all talking about. What are the actions that you're taking? So you say you have a committee. What are the outcomes? What are the actions actually being taken in that evolution? Having said that, there are many other accrediting bodies and educational opportunities for organizations, whether it's through SAGE, SAGE USA, whether it's through the International Well Building Institute. They have debuted last fall a health equity rating for organizations that really focus on the employee side of the employee experience, not just from a design standpoint, from a programmatic standpoint. So there are other resources out there that could perhaps supplement what you're doing with CARF, but at the end of the day, the CARF standard really is the standard, and much of the standard thus far has been, not very much DEI. And so getting, above and past that is going to probably take consistently doing something beyond what the standard is calling for. Monica, did I answer your question?
Give me a good place to start. Yes, thank you.
Okay, fair enough.
Thank you.
Meg, I'm seeing some questions in the chat, so I don't know if you're seeing those or not, but if you could call them out, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, yeah. So from Paul Padilla, it's aside from the depth of culture added to the community, how do you engage the board to accept the changes?
Boy, well, no, we're all colleagues here. I mean, that's I think there's some as they say, red flags. If you don't have term limits, I don't know how to get you started. That to me, that's the floor. And not because of anything other than the fact that if we're talking about having differences in perspectives, the ability for someone to stay on a board indefinitely is the antithesis of that. The other thing I would offer is it's the shared learning piece. I think that there's an aspect of this where not by necessarily choice all the time, boards are not thinking about this issue beyond what is the CEO doing about it, as opposed to what is the board learning about governance and what it takes to be a good fiduciary, and how do you infuse diversity within that governance structure. So, two things I would offer. One is starting with what you have, which is at least transparently putting down what are we saying, who are we saying we are as a board? What's our identity? If somebody looks at us on our page, if someone goes and reads our bios, like what is a snapshot of what this board is? And then what's in our mind missing, which is a different conversation than what's missing, but what do we identify what's missing? And the last thing, you can call me as well. I love talking to boards because I can say the things you can't. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to that courageous conversation. Because as I said at the top of our chat, I cringe when I say this, but it's the truth that many organizations will be just fine occupancy-wise if they don't have a serious eye towards an inclusion strategy. It's just that they will remain what they are and start to look like an outlier within our industry.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Marvell.
Any other questions in the chat, Meg?
Not at the moment.
Cool.
I do have a question for you. Oh, wait,
Go
here's
for
one.
I'm going old school with the actual hand. So what I think was really good that you're talking about is the upside, right? So regardless of whether you sit on the whole equation of everything, I think what you said was, hey, in 40, here's where we're going demographically. So how do you put together a scenario that says, okay, here's the graph, here's what we're going to do, here's the short-term gain, here's the long-term gain, and here's where as an organization you want to do. Plus, I think culturally we're going to be a lot more mixed then, hopefully as well. So I think that's just happening. So how do you set up an argument, regardless of where you sit on the social scale, but how do you set up an argument that says, hey, this is where we're going. Here's how it can increase your bottom line. How do you just make a pure dollar argument? Because if I have I'm an architect. So if I have a not-for-profit client, they're more socially based, I guess I would say, in the decisions and why they do stuff. If I have a for-profit client, it really comes down to the pro forma and the economics of it. Now with the way that organizations are getting funded and then the requirements from the banks on the funds, that definitely helps on that side. But still, if I have a win-win that says, hey, here's why we're doing this. Hey, here's why when you do a market study and you look at that stuff, here's the upside of that. So, and I have one other question after that, but I was curious about your answer on that one.
So if I understand correctly, so the question is how do you look at how do you make the business case for that inclusion strategy, and noting that the demographics are changing, but how do you make that jump with talking with a potential client? I still think it just comes down to the data and really trending out. Well, the most succinct way I've ever said it, Greg, was this, is that 2040, 2050, and not far away. I mean, things that are being built right now will need to be repositioned around that time. Okay, so the designs right now really do matter. But if we continue to kind of keep the status quo, and that means building in certain geographies and not others, doing market studies and feasibility studies that aren't as inclusive as they need to be in order to capture that there is a more diverse market there than perhaps sometimes it shows, then I think we end up with kind of a difficult scenario for making any type of case statement, because the reasons the organizations you work with are doing what they're doing is because there's a market for it, there's a business for it. And I would say that the numbers show that there is a market for being more inclusive, and there's a market for inclusion strategy. If we're talking about a 25 million jump in 65 plus individuals in the next 16, 17 years, and over half of that are made up of individuals that by and large our industry does not serve, meaning Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ. I mean, that to me, that's the case statement. That's the business case right there. And the last piece I'll put to that is, even if you don't buy into that, the staff that you're going to be hiring do, and they will make a decision about working in your organization based upon it.
Mhm. That's good input. And has anybody ever done an analysis, and I haven't seen it, to say, okay, what does that group, does the current, communities that we're providing, does it appeal to that group? Or if your goal is to do that, what might you adjust in your programming, your operations, your care, whatever that is, if you were to appeal to that group? It'd be interesting to see if there was any studies out there that defined, here's what this group would like to do, because there's stuff like we're doing in Indian community. So we're purposely designing it to appeal to that group there, and which means they'll like that hopefully more than they would your regular community. So I just didn't even know if there's any studies there, or if there's a way to do a study that would further enhance maybe your topic.
Yeah, I've seen bits and pieces of what you're talking about, Greg. I mean, from a larger study that where we would target from let's say just a run-of-the-mill market feasibility study, I've not seen someone chop it up that way. It doesn't mean it can't be done, and I think it needs to be, but yeah, you give me some homework, because now I'm really curious to see what may be out there. So I'll track you down if I find the information. So
let's reach out to Margaret at Promatura. She loves good things like this. Let's see if Margaret can tackle it. Thank you, sir.
So Marvell, I'd like to, since you mentioned design, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you be interested in talking briefly about what the development you're working on?
Oh, sure. So very briefly, I mean, because it's pre-development. So we all know what that means. It's not a project till it's a project, but but we myself and working with a design firm that actually specializes and focuses on intergenerational living. And the project is potential project is a collaboration with a children's home, essentially a foster home. And they have a few different critical aspects that would really help them. One, they're finding that their service of LGBTQ youth is lacking because it's new to them, and they are looking for a programmatic approach that could help support LGBTQ youth. One of those resources could be seniors, older adults that are a part of the community. That could be that resource. And we've had other kind of notions of it, but the idea being that we would actually create a community on that campus, on some additional acreage they have, and make it a truly intergenerational community. Not a novel idea. Bridge Meadows out west in Portland, I think Bastion down in New Orleans, and actually Two Life with their Treehouse program in Massachusetts as well. So, the idea behind it is, our model to bring to scale is identifying where the need is for older adult housing, identify where the need might be for a historically marginalized group, and see where the intersectionality is, and then create community from it. So that's our current project is a partnership with that foster home.
I think it's fascinating, and can't wait to hear more about it.
So Yeah, every once in a while, someone will ask me what's the name, what's the meaning behind the name. So if you're curious, maybe that'll be one way for us to wrap up. I'm so sorry, I'm getting over a cold. So, so W Lawson. So, gosh, anybody Marvel Comics fan, like that, maybe, or maybe you watch some of the movies, Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, yeah, just go along with me. And so many times, growing up, like Kane, I had nicknames. And so, Captain Marvel is not a bad nickname, but my name is Marvell. It's spelled differently, as 2 L's instead of 1. Maybe neither here nor there. But Captain Marvel is a real, superhero in the Marvel universe, comics, one of the oldest ones out there, yada yada. So, kind of the origin story behind Captain Marvel is that he was from Kree, and he was, there are two kinds of Kree, it doesn't matter what they are, but they're aliens, purple-skinned and fair-skinned. And the fair-skinned Kree are considered lesser than, they're kind of lesser than a race. And so Captain Marvel came to Earth and was sent to Earth by the Kree to scout Earth out for potential colonization. So interesting about Captain Marvel is that is his hero name. And when he came to Earth, they mispronounced his name. He came to Earth and he helped in the first comic, helped out this army base that was under attack. And they said, oh, I saw that guy over there, that Captain Marvel, he's amazing. Captain Marvel's real name is actually Marvell. Marvell, if you look in the comic books, but also then in the Captain Marvel movie iteration of it, that version of the movie is a different Captain Marvel. Anyway, just like any good superhero, Captain Marvel, when he came to Earth and decided to stay and be a champion for Earth, needed an alter ego. And so he stumbled across someone that had tragically passed away, and that person's name was Dr. Walter Lawson. And so thus the name W Lawson.
That's awesome.
Anybody tells Marvel, I'll kill you. No, I've actually been assured through a trademark attorney that I'm nowhere close to being in the realm of Marvel Comics, and that slight hint to Walter Lawson is not a trademark infringement. So that's the name of the book. That's the name of the company.
Thank you for sharing that.
No problem. I really appreciate you guys taking all this time. I tell you that there's 2 lines of work I'm doing right now. One is creating community, and the other is doing good. The doing good part of it is for organizations that are interested in tackling not just inclusion, but the fact that we have a real housing supports and services crisis going on right now. I help on a consultative basis here and there with a few clients ongoing. And if you're interested to learn more, website's right there, Meg left, and would love to chat with you for that or for other good reasons. So really appreciate you taking the time.
Marvell, thank you very much on behalf of Team Good People. You are most certainly a great person and good people, and thank you for everything. Everybody keep in touch. Thank you for your time. Take care.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Signing off from Power Stocks.